The blank paper sat untouched on Evan Carter's desk, and every second it stayed empty felt louder than the crayons scratching around him. 6 years old, first day of art class at a new school, and Evan had already learned that morning what it meant to unzip a backpack and find nothing but a half-eaten granola bar and a folded moving list where his colored pencils should have been. Everything he owned was still sealed in cardboard boxes back at the apartment. He hadn't known how to explain that to anyone yet. So instead, he simply pushed the blank paper an inch away from himself and stared at his own hands. A few kids glanced over. One girl whispered something to her neighbor. Evan's shoulders crept toward his ears, the particular tightening that came right before a room got too loud, too bright, too much. Then something slid quietly across the table toward him. A small box of colored pencils, corners soft from careful handling, arranged inside by shade, the way someone had clearly organized them 100 times before. Sophie Bennett sat beside him, 6 years old herself, not looking directly at him, not making it a big moment at all. "You can borrow mine," she whispered. Evan didn't say thank you. He didn't look at her either, not right away. He simply studied the box for a long moment, the way he studied most new things, before carefully selecting one pencil, blue, and beginning, slowly, deliberately, to draw a small window. Sophie noticed the way he chose colors, like each one mattered enormously. The way his hand paused before every stroke, like he was deciding something important. When the bell rang for the end of class, Evan slid the box back to exactly where she'd placed it. Every pencil returned to its original position, nothing out of order. Then, hesitating slightly, he turned his paper toward her. It wasn't a house. It was a small living room scene. A man sitting cross-legged on the floor, a takeout container open beside him, a boy sitting close, cardboard boxes stacked in the background, instead of furniture. "That's my dad," Evan said quietly. "That's home." Sophie looked at the drawing a long moment, understanding something about this boy that most of the other kids in the room hadn't bothered to notice yet. That he saw feelings in ordinary things differently than everyone else did. That a floor and some takeout containers could hold an entire home inside them, if you looked at it the right way. Daniel Carter arrived minutes later to collect his son, 34 years old, and visibly braced for another difficult first-day report. Instead, Evan pointed toward the small girl still standing nearby, and said simply, "Sophie shared." Daniel crouched down to Evan's level, something loosening in his chest. "Sophie shared what, buddy?" "Her pencils," Evan said. "All of them." That night, long after Evan had fallen asleep among half-unpacked boxes, Daniel found himself remembering the name of a 6-year-old girl he'd met for less than a minute. At home, Sophie told her mother everything over dinner, practically vibrating with the retelling. "He put every pencil back exactly where I had them, Mom, by color. He didn't even mix them up." Rachel Bennett, 35 and perpetually tired from her shifts as the school nurse, listened while stirring a pot on the stove. "Sounds like he pays close attention to things," she said. "Is that why he talks different? Kind of slow and only a little bit at a time?" Rachel considered the question carefully, the way she considered most things Sophie asked her. "Probably," she said. "Everybody's brain works a little differently, sweetheart. Being kind doesn't mean you have to understand everything about someone first. It just means you notice they need something, and you help." Sophie nodded slowly, filing that away the way 6-year-olds file away the sentences that matter most. Across town, Daniel found Evan at their small kitchen table, drawing Sophie from memory. Pigtails, a striped shirt, the exact tilt of her head when she'd pushed the pencil box toward him. For the first time since the move, Evan didn't ask that night whether they could go back to their old town. Their friendship grew slowly, the way real ones do, built through dozens of small, unremarkable moments, instead of one dramatic turning point. Sophie learned to save Evan the quiet end of the lunch table, away from the clatter and noise that overwhelmed him. Evan noticed, without being asked, exactly where Sophie had left her library book, after she'd spent an entire recess searching for it, in tears. Sophie learned, gradually, not to pull Evan straight into games without asking first. Evan, in turn, slowly started joining her chalk drawings on the playground, adding careful architectural details to streets Sophie had only sketched roughly. During a fire drill that overwhelmed Evan badly, sirens and shuffling crowds pushing him toward total shutdown, Sophie didn't try to hug him or talk him through it the way an adult might have. She simply sat several feet away on the curb, patient and quiet, until Mrs. Whitmore arrived to help him regulate his breathing again. "You didn't have to stay," Evan told her afterward, voice still a little unsteady. "I know," Sophie said simply. Rachel and Daniel finally met properly at pickup one afternoon, their first real conversation slightly awkward on both sides. Rachel admitted her quiet worry that Sophie might be taking on too much responsibility for a friend who needed extra patience. Daniel confessed his own fear, one he rarely said out loud, that other parents would eventually start seeing Evan as a burden, instead of simply a boy who experienced the world differently. "I don't want their friendship built on pity," Daniel said, "for either of them." "Neither do I," Rachel agreed. That conversation changed something in how both parents handled it going forward. Less hovering, less anxious oversight, more room for two children to simply become friends on their own uneven, honest terms. The classroom's Our Neighborhood project revealed something new in Evan entirely. Tasked with building a miniature cardboard town, he became utterly absorbed, remembering details nobody else in the class had thought to notice. The exact number of windows on the library, the yellow curb outside the school entrance, which direction the bakery's front door swung open. Sophie, meanwhile, loved choosing colors, but struggled with the construction itself, and the two naturally settled into an easy partnership neither of them had planned. Then Sophie faced her own quiet crisis. 2 sentences to deliver during the school assembly, and a fear so sharp it froze her solid every time she tried to practice. It was Evan who helped this time. He drew 2 small pictures, one representing each sentence, and pressed them into her hand. "Look at these," he told her. "Not everybody." During the assembly, Sophie held those 2 small drawings tight in her fist and got through both sentences without freezing once. Rachel watched from the audience, throat tight, understanding that the friendship she'd once quietly worried might tilt too far towards Sophie always giving, had become something fully, mutually shared. Daniel began changing too. He'd spent so long anticipating every possible thing that might overwhelm Evan that he'd started avoiding new experiences altogether, keeping his son's world small and predictable out of fear rather than necessity. Watching Evan work so confidently on the neighborhood model finally pushed him to try something different. A Saturday workshop at the community center, quiet but unfamiliar. Evan struggled through the first 20 minutes. Then gradually, he stayed for the entire session. "I think sometimes my own fear has been limiting him more than his autism ever has," Daniel admitted to Rachel afterward, voice quieter than usual. The cardboard neighborhood was eventually selected for display at the town library, though the moment that mattered most happened well before the exhibition itself. Evan noticed an empty cardboard house in the model, and asked Sophie who was supposed to live there. Sophie hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Every house I made has a mom and a dad. Mine only has my mom." Evan thought about that for a long moment, then carefully placed one small cardboard figure of a woman and one little girl inside the empty house. "That's still a house," he said simply. Then he built another one father, one small boy, and set it beside hers. For both children, it was the first time their small, unusual families had been represented exactly as they actually were, and nobody in that classroom needed it explained to them why that mattered. By late summer, 2 sunflowers stood tall in 2 separate pots, one outside Rachel's apartment, one at Daniel and Evan's kitchen window, both grown from seeds won at the town's summer fair months earlier. At an ordinary backyard dinner, Sophie ran between the 2 pots, measuring with a proud, exaggerated seriousness. "Mine's taller. Mine is exactly 3 inches taller, Evan corrected, matter of fact, already holding up a ruler he'd brought specifically for this purpose. Daniel laughed. Rachel carried out a pitcher of lemonade, and the 2 children argued cheerfully over whose watering technique deserved the credit. Nothing about the evening remarkable in any way that would make headlines. That was exactly what made it matter. 2 children who'd started the school year in 2 very small, very different households now had another door they could knock on, another table they belonged at, another family that knew them completely. A box of colored pencils had started it all, but what grew from that quiet, ordinary kindness was something neither single parent had ever expected. 2 small families becoming, gently and permanently, a little less small. If this story reminded you that kindness rarely needs to be big to change everything, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. Leave it a like, and stay a little longer. There's always another story worth telling.